the first problem I had was trying to figure out what to call this, and innovation ideas at work was what I wanted to talk to you about. But it doesn't sound very exciting. So I then worked out, well, maybe what if and why not? Because that's quite a lot of the stuff that goes on through my head. And then it came to, recently we were doing a documentary on some of Richard's earlier activities, and it just reminded me that probably what I've spent a lot of my time doing is how to kill your boss and other great ideas. You forget that 25, 30 years ago, I spent a lot of my time trying to get him killed and trying to get the publicity around that. But in the end, I thought paperclip was probably a better idea. Now, paperclip. If I gave each one of you a paperclip, how many things are you going to create with that paperclip? 5? 10? 20? 50? I don't know. How many people can think of 10 ideas with a paperclip? Yeah, a few, maybe, a few nods. But 50 seems a bit much. Well, later on I want to talk a little bit about how to get the best out of that paperclip. But really, first of all, I wanted to correct some stuff that Ollie mentioned. Those of you who have not yet met, I come with a health warning, right? You can describe what I do, not in the fancy words that Ollie talked about, but 3 letters, 4 letters, 5 letters, 6 letters. It's really much, much more simple. Mad, dumb, crazy, stupid. Those are the words that have been used in my career a number of times. And it's not just one boss, it's several bosses. So, it's stupid to put ice creams on planes because they melt, isn't it? It's a dumb idea to call orange because you can't register a colour. So many things go through people's heads. But actually, if you're a bit thick-skinned like me, you say, well, why not? And what if? And I'm going to start because most of my life at work has felt a bit like this. If you're an innovator, if you enjoy ideas, there's an awful lot of people who spend their time saying, well, that's not going to work, and that's stupid. And it has felt as if you're a square peg in a round hole. And I don't know how many people feel like that here. It is a bit awkward at times, but actually it's the only thing that makes a difference, I think. And so often, businesses, it's the culture that kills the strategy. You can have fantastic strategy, but if you haven't got a culture of openness, of an ability to have a laugh, to say some dumb things maybe and get criticised, but then other people to turn around later on and say, oh, well, actually, I realise now that maybe that wasn't quite so stupid as you thought. So a lot of my life is spent around, not quite apologising, but certainly feeling that it's a little bit awkward in the room at any one time. And ideas rely on that, I think. But I use this quote a lot. Whatever you can do, or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Goethe, if you read the whole quote, it's a fabulous quote. It's really, in my life, so many things, I do them not knowing what the end result's going to be, but knowing what the starting point's going to be. And suddenly you find the whole world changes. So an example would be, at Virgin, we introduced limousines. People said we were mad. Why would you want to have a limousine to come and pick somebody up and take them to the airport? That's extra cost. It is a huge cost, a massive cost. And we would collect them from almost anywhere in the country. But what we found is we didn't realise at the time, we thought we were just bringing them past Heathrow because we didn't want them to go to Heathrow, we wanted them to go to Gatwick. But we did it, and suddenly everybody would get a phone call the day before to say, oh, we're going to pick you up tomorrow morning at 9 or 8 or whatever time happened to be. And the customer would say on the other end, oh, actually, I've changed my plans. I'm not going to be able to make that flight. Well, every other airline just had it as a no-show. Suddenly we knew 24 hours beforehand we could put somebody else onto that flight, and we ran at load factors that were way, way above everyone else because we knew that they were going to turn up on the day, and actually it made us so much more money from being an expense. So it was just an idea that was seen as dumb, stupid, crazy, adding cost to the business, and it ended up flipping it completely the other way. It's worth remembering that, I think, because actually to me it makes so much difference. You have to be bold in this business. You can't stand back and hope that things might work out. You've got to be bold, and you'd be amazed at what happens. Because really, a few years ago, there was only one choice. I can remember going to the high street. There was a Sainsbury's, so you shopped at Sainsbury's. But now they're all there. So you've got to make a decision between the two. Which of the ones that do you like best, A or B? But of course, there's so much opportunity out there and choice out there. Suddenly, it's which are the ones that are making me feel good? Who's making me feel that little bit better? And when you see all your products, what are the things that make you smile a little bit? But of course, everyone's cottoned onto that. So they're all trying to make you smile with fancy names and that sort of stuff. So where is that love? Where do you see that love when somebody's trying to communicate with you, to show you their ideas? Where's that love? And I get so frustrated when I see so many businesses. I was talking to Ollie earlier on about how frustrated I get with LinkedIn, because it just seems to bombard me with stuff. If they really did love me, wouldn't they do something different? Isn't there some opportunity out there for brands to come along and really show that love? Because when you show it, we talk about being in this age of innovation, but it's not just about technology. It is about services, about a whole range of things. And actually, if we're in this age, shouldn't we be somehow focusing it on love and affection in some way? Because actually, it's not just technology for technology's sake or innovation for innovation's sake. I mean, when we launched Orange, it was seen as the first digital mobile. Well, I can remember having a pager in my pocket before I joined, and it was a pager that was fantastic. Then we went on to text, and it goes on to WhatsApp. If you see how innovation works, every time, I think WhatsApp showed quite a lot of love, because you weren't having to make it too much harder work for me. I didn't have to. I can remember one of our guys at work had 3 separate pages. He had one for work, one for personal, and one for his mistress. And so, all these pages would be going off all the time. Somehow simplifying his life would have been easier, I think. But when you think about how does all this work, 80% of executives, as we heard earlier on today, say innovation is very or extremely important to their companies. That's great. Good to know, isn't it? Fantastic. But they can't find the talent. Talent isn't there. Well, maybe they're not attractive enough to talent. My son just went recently into tech in London, and he went into a number of companies, and suddenly I saw him coming home with this huge smile on his face. You wouldn't believe what they have in Facebook. Their kitchen's full of Smarties and football and this and the other. And so he suddenly got a snapshot of all the way different companies work. So innovation isn't necessarily just for your customers. It could be for your employees. Now, your employees are your customers, I believe, as well. So how do you get the best out of them? But when you look at that statement and then you look at this one, 98% of kids start school as creative geniuses. You give them a paperclip, they will find 100 things to do with it. They're not locked in with, how big is the paperclip or how soft is the metal. They just imagine all sorts of amazing things with it. So how do we get those kids to come through into work and to use it? It's another interesting thing when you look at that statistic. And what happens when you go to school? The very first thing you're told is sit down, shut up, and stop daydreaming. But isn't that exactly what we all want at work? So how do we maintain that? How do we get them to stand up? I mean, I get my best ideas in the mornings. Anybody, any idea of the best time for some creative thinking? I mean, I've talked to a number of people. Everyone says, mornings are definitely better than afternoons because we're not quite so tired or whatever.
After 2 pints.
After 2 pints? Yeah, I find mine, just as I'm about to fall asleep on a plane, that daydreaming bit somehow kicks in. But I've worked out somewhere around 10:15 seems to be a good time. You've got all those emails out of the way. You've had your first maybe hit of coffee or something. But somewhere in there's got to be some great time for ideas. And we need to make time. Because when we talk about this, I met a fascinating woman. She was a professor of pain at Oxford University. And I was introduced to her. I went up to her and I thought, hang on a minute. Is this Miss Whiplash? Well, who am I going to be introduced to? And actually it was removing pain from the brain she was working on. But she described the brain really well. She said it's an organ, but it's like a muscle. You need to exercise it. So you constantly need to be working on it. So you throwing some brainstorming at your a group of people and saying, let's come up with some ideas. They're not used to doing it. You ask them to go and do a marathon, they'd find that a struggle as well. So we need to find ways of constantly encouraging and engaging our people around us to think of great ideas. Because without those, we're going to fail. But we are, as we've heard all day today, at the age of disruption. And this disruption is key because that's the bit I love. So many businesses you go in, they say, we've got a fantastic strategy, they lay it all out, but culture isn't quite right. But if there's some major disruption, they have to do something about it. So often you go to businesses and they're not desperate enough for it. They manage to put it off, they manage to hide it or water it down to such an extent that it doesn't really get through the skin of the custard. So the disruption is key. And if you read lots of places, they say, actually, the next advantage would come from harnessing that disruption. I'm sure everyone would agree, we all want to harness that. But there's something else in there, and I think that actually it's not just harnessing it, it's actually finding what I call the love. Love of disruption. I really, really love change. Brexit, to me, is an amazing opportunity. I think about it, I flip-flopped. A mate of mine calls it wibble-wobble, all the way. What am I going to do, left or right? And my head, right-hand side, left-hand side was saying different things to me. Now it's happened, we need to do something, and we need to embrace it, I think. And so the opportunity for the disruption that we can use is amazing. So imagine if we all loved the idea of Brexit. What would that bring? Love comes into a business that I joined, it's called Virgin Atlantic Airways, under the trade description that I think that probably, it was one aircraft. So rather than Virgin Atlantic Airways, Virgin Atlantic Airline would probably be a better description. And when I joined, it just took off every afternoon. And when I went into the office, if it was back again in the morning, we'd had a successful flight to New York and back. But there was a love there. And actually, the love wasn't just from Richard and from the staff. It was from everyone that was involved in it. They wanted success. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do you get that love? How do you make more of it? We came up with this idea of magic moments. And so many businesses, when you get an app for the first time, I've noticed a few times recently when you get things, they just let you get on with it. If they really love me, wouldn't they help me work the way through those first few days? And the first, I got a phone call from Vodafone. It was extraordinary the other day. I switched networks and they said, we just wanted to make sure you're all right. And it was quite unheard of, I'd have thought. But it seemed to be in the right place. If they'd had great network coverage, I think I probably would have stayed with them. But it was a start, at least. And so, how do you actually create those magic moments in your business? And it's just as important for technology as it is for service industry or whatever. But we also created a journey, and so often you see great ideas. They're great for the next 6 weeks, 12 weeks, maybe in the next 6 months. Where does it take you? Where does the journey take you to? And at Virgin, we were very keen on putting the markers down as to where do we want to go, what do we want it to look like. So that was great fun. But actually, we came up with an idea, love at first flight. If you flew with us, we wanted you to love it. Because actually, if you didn't, it'd be very easy to go to British Airways or to somebody else. So we spent a lot of time. And it wasn't just on the regular flights, it's when things went wrong. So when things go wrong in a technology world nowadays, the recovery plans are sometimes appalling. I bought a printer this week from Amazon. They wanted to upgrade the one I got. I get frustrated because you buy one and then within a few months it's telling you you've got to rechange the imaging, this, that, and the other. I bought this printer, great, turned up, no ink. They'd missed it out of the box or whatever. So I'm sitting with this very heavy paperweight, trying to figure out what to do with it next. Had to go on, I complained, trying to get through to somebody and get them to send me some more printer ink was impossible. Anyway, it's very frustrating. And do they really love me? Maybe the guy in the warehouse who sent it out should have checked. If he'd really checked, maybe you'd have seen that love. But we worked on other things. Not everything works. So we talked earlier on about how you go through some stages. But, we tried things. So we tried ice cream. The first day, absolutely appalling, all melted. It was just milkshakes, really. Nobody got to enjoy them. 2 or 3 days later, we packed it with dry ice. They were so hard, they were landing in New York before they'd softened up a bit to eat. But after about a week's worth, we'd managed to figure a way of getting these on board that they would just work perfectly. We didn't know at the time. We tried popcorn, we tried cookies, and then suddenly ice cream worked. Because actually, when you fly, the aircraft's flying high, minus 60 temperature outside, the air comes into the aircraft, it gets dried out, heated up, and of course it goes very dry, you get a very dry mouth. Ice creams were perfect. Why hadn't anybody else thought of it? We were just trying, because I quite like the idea of going to the movies, and in those days you watched a big screen, and I always enjoyed going to the movies and having an ice cream halfway through. So it started off as one sort of part of the in-flight entertainment and ended up being something that people would say, oh, it's amazing, we flew Virgin to X, Y, and Z, and then we had ice creams. Well, they paid probably 700 quid for those ice creams, so it wasn't too bad a deal on our side, and they cost us, less than 50p. And we got pissed off because we'd see all the big in-flight entertainment companies coming and offering British Airways and KLM these in-flight sets, and they weren't interested in talking to Virgin because we only had 2 aircraft, or maybe 3 by that time. So we went out, I personally went out with my card and bought some video Walkmans from New York, put them on the plane, found some films. Suddenly we've got our own video system. And people were talking about it. Customers are trying to nick them. It's always a good sign. And sure enough, within a short time, we'd got other people interested in supplying us with these things. And suddenly you could watch the movie you wanted rather than one that we wanted you to watch. And all these things just sort of built up and built up. And so we had an aircraft. We only had 2 classes travel. It was upper class and economy. And why shouldn't we do something? There was a lot of pressure to do a first class, and we didn't really want to have that. We had this great business class. But in the summer, you'd want a lot of economy seats. In the winter, you'd want business class seats. And we worked out, well, why don't we just try one cabin? And so we bought some old British Caledonian seats and retrimmed them. And sure enough, this cabin became the most popular because the businessmen that couldn't afford to go business class all the time would downgrade to what it was called in those days, middle class. Because then the Americans didn't want to call it middle class because they didn't like being middle class. So it got this premium economy. In fact, we went to a mid-class for a while because there was mid-Atlantic and mid-Pacific, but sure enough, it came back just a premium economy. But people loved it in economy because they could upgrade. And from my point of view, it was great for me because I was the guy who did all the upgrades for people. So any celebrity wanted an upgrade from economy to upper class. I'd say, oh, we can only upgrade you 1 class, I'm afraid. So if you're a premium economy, we'll upgrade you to upper class. But if you're economy, we can only upgrade you to premium economy. So it's quite nice, actually, how it worked out for everyone. And it was an idea that was just simply done on a few seats that suddenly caught on. But, of course, the backpacks that we did for kids, we put chocolate in. They were sick about 20 minutes into the flight because they'd eaten all the chocolate too quickly. Those ideas don't work, and you don't get to see those on a chart too often. But you do need to consistently challenge yourself, I think, and challenge the status quo that's out there. But you also have to have fun. And a great part of Virgin was having fun. And so I've always liked a good April Fool. And we did this one. This was just a picture that we painted. We did a centre press release out about how we'd rented these Air France Concords. We were painting. There were 2 coming into Gatwick Airport later that week. The telephone lines got jammed. The switchboard at Gatwick got jammed. It was all a bit of fiction. I don't know what would have happened nowadays. We would have probably got slapped wrists and all sorts of stuff. But actually, the staff enjoyed it. The people at Gatwick, it's part of fun. And I think that you have to have fun at work. And we try to follow that theme. Virgin had a tremendous reputation across the group of playing pranks on each other. And it feels as if some of that's gone in business nowadays. It's a shame, in my mind, because you need to have fun. You're going to spend most of your life working. Make it fun. One year we'd gone ballooning, and I personally enjoyed ballooning. Richard enjoyed it. But I'd always had this idea of the final frontier, space. And so I'd got the balloon guys down in Bristol to build me a little replica. I had a little gyroscope on my desk, and it was of a UFO, tiny little thing. I said, "Can you copy that for me, but make it 120 foot wide?" "Oh yeah, we can do that." "Could it fly?" "Yeah, I can do that." So we spread a few rumours around people that UFOs had been sighted in the southeast, and we got a couple of journalists on board, particularly Chris. No, it wasn't Chris. It was can't remember who, but at Capital Radio. And suddenly this thing started to go a bit crazy. We had to do a takeoff flight just to test the thing the night before April 1st, and sure enough, we took off in Kenley Aerodrome, and the wind took us south west rather than northeast, which it was supposed to. We were supposed to fly from Kenley to Crystal Palace, no problem. Went completely opposite direction, straight into the Gatwick handling zone. The balloon itself was quite realistic, if I can get to it. Oop. And sure enough, the M25 came to a standstill. Everyone was parked on the M25. Richard was actually up in the balloon at the time, and when he landed, the police were there. He said his name was Chris Moss, so I had the CAA on my back. But it was actually about having fun, and both the staff and everyone around enjoyed it, and it actually became part of the culture of Virgin. But funnily enough, on that balloon, we re-inflated it the next day at a football ground, and around the band of it, it had some words. It didn't say Virgin Atlantic, because that was a bit coarse, wasn't it? Advertising your own airline on it. We put the words Virgin Galactic Airways. That was 25 years ago, and it planted a tiny little seed. Completely impossible to do, but why not? What if comes back in again? And so, sure enough, a few years later on, Richard's had this seed planted and he won't let go. It came from maybe something stupid and dumb, crazy idea, but it works. And I'm absolutely convinced that, in my lifetime we'll see people going into space. That would be an amazing, amazing achievement. And to me, that's what innovation, that's what daring, that's what the whole thing is around. It's about pushing the boundaries. Whatever you happen to be doing it that little bit different. It is about seeing things differently. And I'd spent 8-9 years at Virgin, and I was sort of getting bored, sort of wanted to do more. I didn't want to become an airline marketing person. And I got approached by a company called Microtel. They said, come and work for us. It'd be great fun, technology. We're building this new network. Funnily enough, just up the road from here. And they had a base station just on the motorway. You could sit in your office and see this one base station they had. So they could make a phone call. What they explained to me was that if I had a mobile phone, I could make it to this base station. Then the call went from there on the landline network all the way into Birmingham. And then from Birmingham, it came down on a landline to the house next to me. It seemed like a very complicated system. But it was the early days of mobile, and it was digital. And they loved it. And it was a project. It had been a project for many years. So all the guys in the office were working on this great project called Microtel. Why Microtel? Well, that's what they made, small telephones, Microtel. And nothing wrong in that at all. But somehow you needed to change the culture. And I was fortunate because, again, that disruption was there. They weren't the first to market. They weren't the second. They weren't the third. There was Vodafone and Cellnet, as it was in those days. They had 50-50 market share. A company launched ahead of us called One-to-One, and they very quickly offered free calls. We couldn't do that. We could not do it on a network. So they quickly made some headway, and here were us coming last. And the company, Hutchison, had already spent an enormous amount of money on a product called Rabbit that had failed. Been a bit of a disaster in a couple of other areas. So what we're going to do, and actually that disruption, that absolute opportunity was great for me, because actually I don't think it would have ever changed its name unless there'd been some real big imperatives. So you have to go out and communicate. And we did. We obviously, as you know, changed the name. Just up the road from here, Orange was created. Orange because it's a colour. But then, of course, that other thing kicks in, the lawyers. Don't mean to be rude about them, but you can't register a colour. And so I had this huge debate as to whether... nobody in this room, but actually... we had, so is it a colour or is it a fruit? And I obviously won that argument, but you weren't in those days allowed to register a colour. So we had a huge argument as to what it is. And sure enough, it worked. And it's funny because, again, you have to try and stand out. And people know about the future's bright, it's changed now. But it was around saying times are changing, things are going to be different. And we had to have all sorts of little things. Well, it doesn't seem much now per second billing, but my argument at the time was if you went into a petrol station and said, we've rounded it up to the nearest gallon, you wouldn't be very happy. You shouldn't really be happy about your phone company that keeps keeps on pushing your minutes up each month by rounding them up. So we did some interesting things. We did 5 or 6 different things that we did to make it different and separate from everyone else. And of course, it did very well. It probably did too well, actually, because suddenly it gets acquired by all these different people. But what we did there was not what I would call plug and play. It wasn't go to the desk and pull some thoughts from technology off and plug them into the system. It was around, let's really get to understand the customers. Because actually, as soon as you got into a room and you talk to customers, it's not about creativity for creativity's sake. I think it's around seeing things differently. So for a lot of my time, I spend looking at things, and what is it you see there? I saw customers that were frustrated and angry, fed up with the way they were being treated, and I couldn't help but believe that if we got it right, we could be a brand new network, a different type of network. And it was actually the one thing about Orange that made it different. We said, here's some managing directors of Vodafone and Cellnet as it was, and One-to-One. Oh, well, I know what they do. I'd like to go and talk to the guy from Orange, because that sounds different. That's got to be different. And so, to me, Orange was the thing that gave it the ability to be different, to say different, to act different. They weren't quite so happy about the April Fools, I must admit. We didn't seem to quite get those run. But there were a few fun times that we had. And I think so often it's what you see. It's about how your brain translates that. So the very first time you see an app on your phone, how does it look? How do you feel about it? With all of that, though, moved on from Orange, did another brand in Bristol, where merged Lloyds and TSB, and it was interesting because actually, was it ever for customers? Very difficult to see where the customer's going to win on that thing, and I think we've seen them now split up. 10 years later, or however long it is, they're now separated again, they're separate banks, and so quite often you have to figure out what does the end game look like. And I joined Director Inquiries. Why would you ever want to do that? Pretty dull job, but there was an opportunity maybe to do something a little different, and I love taking on the incumbents. Anything with the word British in it, British Airways, British Telecom, British Gas maybe. They are great opportunities for me anyway to do what I do best, which is communicate in a very different way. And we took on the Direct Inquiry system. It was an American company. We had to fight really hard because every single time there'd been a deregulation anywhere in the world, the incumbent, the BT of that country, had always won. And we need to do things differently. And so, sure enough, we came up with these two crazy guys. The investors thought they were absolutely bonkers. They thought they were Middle Eastern terrorists. And they did not get it at all. We stood outside of the agency. We'd filmed the first ad. And the two investors stood there and said, "This is mad. This is completely crazy. It's never going to work." Chris, how long are you going to be with us, Chris? And and actually, I'd been consulting to them, so I sort of had an escape clause. I said, "It's going to work, trust me." And by the time we'd filmed the second ad, people were already shouting, "Got your number." And they've seen a very, very good return on it. I hope nobody still dials with all the new technology. I hope nobody still dials 118, 118.
How did you come up with that idea? Like, two random guys out.
So it was all about trying to understand what the problem was. And the problem in everyone's head was, why do I need to learn another number? It was like a confusion of wires, So we had to cut through all of that. And we had two guys because we had different choices, and we didn't know what everyone else was going to do. So BT were 118-500, so that's 118, and then another number 500. Another one of our competitors was 118866. Those were the Germans, and they made that into 118866, and they got lots of nuisance calls. One of the other competitors decided that they wanted to do another, and actually we had two choices. We could either we had 118811, or you could read that as 118811, or we had this other number, which was just 118 twice. And we thought, we did some numbers, worked with people on how do you remember numbers. And actually you only have to remember one number, which is 118. You just dial it twice. That was a much more simple way of doing it. And actually, that wasn't the big win. The big win was when we actually brought the old boy, 192, in, because nobody told you why you had to learn a number. And so often it's, why do I need to listen to this? Well, as soon as you gave them a reason. So we saw our call volume spike. It spiked almost 3 times the volume of the previous week as soon as we told people why. And that ad was, 192 is going, soon to be replaced by lots of new numbers, all beginning with 118. Ours ends in 118. And it was just trying to get it into people's brains because they don't want to learn anything new in particular. But it became great fun. I met the guy in the middle actually was in one of the Daleks. So he was an actor quite well known, but you never got to see his face. He has a very strange voice, obviously, but lovely, really, really, really lovely man. And it became, these pictures are not too good, it became fun because you had to make it for everyone. So with the first, when we had loads and loads of calls at the very beginning, people just calling up and saying, "Oh, got your number." And we did the same thing in France. We had to do something different because the French knew what we did over here. The French didn't allow 118, 118. They said, "Oh, it's far too good a number." Nothing to do with the campaign, of course. It was just far too good a number. So we had to choose a different number. And in France, the numbers were, what the numbers? The old number was 12. And so we had to figure out how do we use the 12. And we weren't allowed to advertise it early. So we did a neat little trick where we took, and we had a number which was, let's just get it right. In France, it was 118218. And so if you put the 1 and the 2 and you blank out the other letters, you can show the 12, and then we just reveal the 118218. We had a couple of other little things going for us. We used music, and in France, they had 2 weather girls Well, at the end of the weather, they used to do this keep fit thing, Veronique and Davina, and so they do this little dance, the Tutu You Tour, and we got the sort of music into people's heads, and it never went away, and we beat France Telecom significantly in France. And it became sort of part of the culture there as well, but it was on a different theme, but it was, again, trying to learn a number in an easy way, really. But I believe, this is sort of my role, and Steve Jobs talked about it, it's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy. But if you've got technology, you aren't in the Navy. You need to be a pirate, I think, and you need to constantly look at different ways of doing stuff. And so to me, this is my rationale, there's a great book all around how you need to have more pirates out there, more people to take risks, do things differently maybe. And, you know, I think that actually in any job having fun is absolutely key. You have to think smart. So we made loads of mistakes at Virgin, at Orange, all these places. Try not to make the same mistake twice, but think smart. Think not just today and tomorrow, but think ahead of what's going to happen. And being different. And talking about being different, I do have a different view on the Brexit, as I mentioned earlier on. I think Frank Sinatra said, you know, there may be trouble ahead, but while there's music and moonlight and love and romance, let's face the music and dance. Thank you.